You think they were blessed by the gods? Then explain why their bloodlines rotted from the inside. For centuries, monarchies across Europe upheld a dangerously seductive myth that purity in bloodlines was the key to eternal power. They believed their royal blood was a divine gift, a force that would guarantee their legacies and the strength of their reigns. But in their relentless pursuit of this genetic perfection, they paid a price, one that was not just paid in pride, but in suffering, disease, and the eventual collapse of entire empires. What happens when kings and queens, desperate to preserve their royal blood, cripple their own lineages in the name of a mythical pure blood? The answer is as tragic as it is grotesque. The dynasties that were built on this delusion didn't rise, they withered from within, consumed by the very obsession they had sought to perfect. Take a moment to imagine the unthinkable. A king sitting upon a throne who could neither speak nor eat properly, let alone rule. His body betrayed him at every turn, leaving him helpless and humiliated. This was no divine ruler, but a biological disaster, a living warning of the true cost of inbreeding. This was not an isolated event. From the Habsburgs to the Romanovs, the royal bloodlines of Europe were not blessed, they were cursed. What they called royal blood was nothing more than a ticking time bomb. The desire to keep power within their own families led to horrifying deformities, crippling diseases, and painful deaths that should never have been hidden from the world. In this twisted race for genetic purity, the royal families didn't just fail, they destroyed their own legacies, leaving their empires on the brink of collapse. And now, well reveal the haunting truth of these royal bloodlines, where tragedy replaced glory and power was only skin deep. Stay with us as we unravel the most chilling, tragic, and ultimately damning stories from history. If you're ready to uncover the real cost of royal inbreeding, like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment on which royal tragedy shocked you the most, and join us in questioning the myth of purity that shaped European history. The practice of marrying within royal families to keep the bloodline pure was hailed as a noble cause, an effort to consolidate power and preserve the family legacy. But what appeared to be a well-intentioned strategy quickly spiraled into a genetic nightmare. The concept of pure blood became a curse, a destructive force that would doom the very families it was meant to protect. Royalty, in their pursuit of genetic perfection, didn't just breed power, they bred disease, deformities, and suffering that lasted for generations. These unions were not acts of preservation, but of desperation. The goal was clear: maintain royal bloodlines. But the result? A tragic tale of biological ruin. Let's start with one of the most infamous families of European royalty, the Habsburgs. Example 1. The Habsburgs, a genetic disaster in the name of purity. The Habsburg Dynasty was obsessed with keeping power within their family, often marrying close relatives to ensure that the throne would never fall into the hands of outsiders. Over 16 generations of inbreeding, this goal led to one of the most well-known and devastating genetic outcomes: the Habsburg Jaw. The Habsburg Jaw, a grotesquely protruding lower jaw, became a visible sign of the family's genetic decay. But the consequences were far more devastating than a visible deformity. For Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king, the impact was catastrophic. Born after 16 generations of inbreeding, his health was a disaster. He couldn't speak clearly, chew food, or even reproduce. He was rendered incapable of ruling, not just by his physical deformities, but also by his mental incapacity. Charles' life was filled with humiliation. Court servants had to pre-chew his food, as his jaw protruded so much that his teeth couldn't meet. His mental state was even more tragic. He was described as playing with toys during state meetings, unable to focus on anything of importance. his reign was reduced to a puppet monarchy, manipulated by advisors who controlled the throne in his stead. In addition to his inability to rule, Charles suffered from severe seizures, chronic illness, and sterility. He could not produce an heir. His body betrayed him on every level, and when he died in 1700, the consequences were far-reaching. The lack of an heir triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that raged across Europe and redefined borders for years to come. Charles' life, a tragic manifestation of royal inbreeding, didn't just mark the fall of a single man. It ignited a war that would reshape Europe for decades. Example 2. Queen Victoria's deadly gift, a silent curse. If the Habsburg story is one of biological failure, Queen Victoria's legacy is far more insidious. She too unknowingly carried a curse, hemophilia, and, in doing so, passed it along to several of her children, spreading the disease throughout European royal families. While Victoria herself was a carrier, she never displayed symptoms of the disease, which is a genetic disorder that impairs the blood's ability to clot. But she passed it on to her children, and hemophilia quickly became a royal scourge, quietly tearing apart several royal families across Europe. Her son, Prince Leopold, was one of the most tragic victims of this inherited curse. Leopold, the son of Victoria and Prince Albert, lived in constant terror. Every small injury, even a minor bump, could lead to dangerous internal bleeding. His life was marked by fear of living and fear of dying at the hands of his own blood. The disease confined him to a life of rigid, controlled behavior. He could not engage in normal activities. Simple pleasures such as riding a horse or participating in sports were too dangerous for him. Royal families, however, did not want to reveal this deadly flaw. Death from hemophilia was frequently hidden under vague labels, such as sudden illness or fever. The royal families feared the truth would tarnish their image of invincibility. In Leopold's case, his death at the age of 30 was covered up, as were the deaths of other hemophiliac princes across Europe. But these were not isolated events. Hemophilia, passed through generations of royal blood, was a silent destroyer of the European aristocracy. From Russia to Spain, the disease infiltrated royal families, creating an ever-expanding web of destruction. It didn't just affect one dynasty, it spread through the veins of the entire European nobility, undermining their ability to rule and weakening the monarchies at their most vulnerable. As the disease passed from one generation to the next, it slowly ate away at the strength of monarchies. The Romanovs, in particular, felt the weight of this curse. The Russian royal family, already on shaky ground, was further destabilized by the hemophilia that plagued their heir, Alexei Romanov. Alexei's struggle was much like that of his great-grandmother's son, Prince Leopold. The young Tsarevich lived in constant fear of bleeding to death, unable to lead a normal life. His parents, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, did everything in their power to protect him, relying on the controversial mystic Rasputin, who seemed to have a mysterious influence over Alexei's condition. But this only further undermined the legitimacy of the Romanov family, as Rasputin's increasing influence led to scandal, public unrest, and distrust. The consequences of royal obsession with purity. Queen Victoria's hemophilia curse is a staggering example of how a single, seemingly small genetic flaw can weaken entire empires. But what's perhaps even more tragic is that these royal families, by obsessing over the purity of their bloodlines, not only sealed their own doom, but also contributed to the downfall of the very systems they sought to preserve. The Habsburgs, with their obsession over pure blood, created a legacy of biological disaster. They produced a ruler who couldn't function, a country that descended into conflict, and an empire that crumbled in the aftermath. Similarly, Queen Victoria's silent legacy of hemophilia spread through royal veins like a virus, slowly weakening monarchies that were already on the edge of collapse. It wasn't just the disease that killed them, it was the inability to adapt, to accept that the idea of pure blood was a dangerous illusion. For both the Habsburgs and the British royals, this myth of genetic purity did far more damage than good. The obsession with bloodlines led to crises of leadership, public distrust, and a loss of legitimacy. It fostered weakness in places where strength was needed most and contributed directly to the fall of powerful families and the reshaping of European history. In the end, these royal families didn't just fall due to political pressure or external enemies. They collapsed from within, crippled by their own obsession with perfection. The curse of pure blood they so desperately sought to preserve was, in the end, their undoing. The ultimate catastrophe. The Romanov family. In 1904, the Russian imperial family, the Romanovs, one of the most powerful ruling families in the world, celebrated the birth of a son, Alexei Romanov, with hopes of securing the dynasty for future generations. But what should have been a joyous occasion turned into the beginning of the end for the Russian Empire. Alexei, the long-awaited heir to the throne, inherited the deadly curse of hemophilia from his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria of Britain. This silent killer would haunt the Romanov family for the rest of their reign. Hemophilia, a disorder that prevents blood from clotting, meant that every scrape, every fall, every accident, no matter how minor, could be fatal. It wasn't just a disease, it was a death sentence. The Romanovs were about to be plunged into a tragedy that would not only devastate their family, but also send shockwaves through the entire Russian Empire. Alexei's life was a constant battle for survival. He couldn't engage in the activities that most children took for granted. He couldn't play sports, run, or even move around freely without the risk of internal bleeding. His joints would swell, his body would fill with blood, causing agonizing pain, and leaving him bedridden for weeks. The family's efforts to conceal his condition only added to the growing pressure on the monarchy. Alexei's suffering was not just a personal tragedy, it was a political burden, kept hidden from the Russian people. The family's determination to protect Alexei and keep his condition a secret became a trap, a chain that would eventually drag the Romanovs to their doom. The desperation to save their son led Tsarina Alexandra and Tsar Nicholas II to a controversial figure. Grigory Rasputin, a mystic with claimed healing powers. Rasputin's mysterious ability to ease Alexei's pain, whether through prayer or something else, was seen as a miracle by the Romanovs. His influence over the Tsarina, in particular, grew rapidly as she became convinced that he could keep Alexei alive. However, Rasputin's growing power within the royal family did not go unnoticed. His influence over Tsarina Alexandra turned from a mysterious blessing into a political poison. Rasputin was a deeply controversial figure, widely disliked by the Russian aristocracy and the general population. His influence over the royal family, especially Alexandra, led many to view him as a manipulative, dangerous charlatan. He became a symbol of the monarchy's incompetence, a direct link between the crown and the growing discontent of the people. The royal family, once seen as powerful and revered, now appeared weak and indecisive, completely under the sway of an uneducated mystic. The public resentment toward the Romanovs only grew stronger. Rasputin's unchecked power and scandalous behavior made the monarchy appear not just out of touch, but deeply corrupt. The Russian people, already struggling under the burdens of war, famine, and inequality, found themselves growing ever more disillusioned with their rulers. The political situation in Russia was growing more and more volatile. Tsar Nicholas II's leadership had been under pressure for years, but with Rasputin's influence undermining the royal family's credibility, the Russian Revolution was becoming inevitable. The country was seething with unrest, and the monarchy had already lost the faith of the people. The tragic end of the Romanovs. The First World War only worsened the situation. By 1917, Russia was devastated. The country was in the throes of a brutal conflict that drained resources, shattered morale, and exacerbated internal divisions. Tsar Nicholas II was already struggling with internal problems. His leadership was widely considered ineffective, and his alliance with Rasputin had deeply eroded his legitimacy. The empire, already on the brink of collapse, could not survive the added weight of a devastating war. The final blow came in March 1917, when revolution erupted in Russia. The people, fed up with the monarchy's incompetence and mismanagement, took to the streets in mass protests. The discontent that had been brewing for years finally exploded into a full-scale revolution. Tsar Nicholas II, unable to stem the tide of anger, was forced to abdicate, and the Russian Empire came to an end. The royal family was imprisoned. Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children were taken to the Ekaterinburg Palace in Siberia. Despite their fall from grace, they were still the Romanovs, the last remnants of an ancient, mighty dynasty. Yet, the curse that had followed them for decades, Alexius hemophilia, had not only caused their suffering, but played a significant role in their ultimate demise. The disease had weakened the Romanovs both physically and politically. The family's tragic end came on the night of July 17, 1918. Tsar Nicholas II and his family were executed by Bolshevik forces. The royal family, once symbols of absolute power, were now reduced to martyrs of a fallen empire. The revolution had swept away not only the monarchy, but the entire way of life that had existed in Russia for over 3 centuries. Ironically, Alexis' condition, a disorder that could have been easily treated with modern medical advancements, played a pivotal role in bringing down a dynasty. Had the Romanovs understood the full scope of the disease, or had they access to the medical knowledge we possess today, it's possible that Alexius' life could have been saved, and the monarchy might have found a way to preserve itself. But in the end, the disease, combined with the political turmoil and Rasputin's disastrous influence, was the catalyst for the collapse of an empire. Alexius hemophilia, a hidden genetic curse, was not just a private suffering, but a silent agent of revolution, contributing to the downfall of the Romanovs and the Russian monarchy as a whole. The moral of the story: history is filled with tragic stories, but few are as profoundly disturbing as the genetic disasters that struck European royal families. The pursuit of purity in bloodlines, which many believed was a noble and necessary task, ultimately led to untold suffering, the weakening of entire empires, and the destruction of royal power. What began as an attempt to safeguard dynasties through selective marriages ended as a series of biological catastrophes, each one more devastating than the last. From the Habsburgs to Queen Victoria's silent legacy of hemophilia, to the tragic downfall of the Romanovs, the obsession with maintaining pure bloodlines did not only harm the individuals directly affected, it had profound consequences on the nations they ruled. These genetic mistakes were not isolated events, but symptoms of a much larger cultural illness: the belief that purity, whether in blood, culture, or power, was worth the human cost. The Habsburgs, once the pinnacle of European power, were undone by their inbreeding. The Romanovs, whose bloodline had reigned for over 3 centuries, were brought to ruin by the curse of hemophilia, a condition passed through generations in their family. And Queen Victoria, despite being revered as a matriarch of Europe, unwittingly passed on a genetic flaw that caused suffering and death among her descendants. All of this generational suffering, political instability, and the collapse of empire happened for the sake of preserving a myth. A myth that purity of blood meant strength, that by keeping their bloodlines pure, these families could secure their power for eternity. The The harsh reality proved otherwise. This obsession didn't strengthen them. It broke them apart. The legacy of the royal curse. Today, we may look at these stories as the tragic fall of dynasties, but the underlying question remains. How many other systems today still prioritize the false notion of perfection and purity? Whether in genetics, race, culture, or even power structures, the dangers of obsessing over purity have not disappeared. Untold Legacy challenges you to think about this in our modern world. Is there still a danger in obsessing over purity in our societies today? How much are we willing to sacrifice for the illusion of perfection, be it in our own lives, our cultures, or the systems of power that shape our world? The lessons of the royal family's downfall are not just historical curiosities. They are warnings. What cost are we willing to pay to maintain a myth of purity? And what kind of world are we creating for future generations? The stories of the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, and Queen Victoria are more than just histories of personal and political failure. They are the living proof that the price of purity is often too high to pay. So, as we've seen, the pursuit of power through inbreeding and the misguided quest for pure bloodlines led to some truly devastating outcomes for European royalty. These weren't just isolated medical oddities. They were genetic time bombs that shaped history, toppling empires, and redrawing the maps of Europe. It's a chilling reminder that arrogance and a refusal to acknowledge the complexities of human genetics can have catastrophic consequences. Ultimately, their story is a cautionary tale about the importance of embracing diversity, both in our societies and within our own DNA. What do you think about all of this? Were you surprised by any of these stories? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to ask any questions you have, or share any insights you might have about the intersection of genetics and history. And if you enjoyed this deep dive and want to explore more fascinating historical topics with a genetic twist, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching.